space where I'm doing whatever I want because life's too short not to. And today we have another Lo Sews It. This is another DIY Lolita JSK. A little while back, I went to a Studio Ghibli themed market, flea market, and I had this fabric sitting around from when I was in the Amish country and thought that it looked a lot like Sophie to me. So, this fabric is a beautiful coastal seashell with this like kind of faded blue. I did pre-wash the fabric because I learned the hard way that you should always be pre-washing your fabric before you start cutting. I had about 6 yards of this, and thank goodness I had 6 yards. Let's get into the math of this. So I followed Sew Black's sewing tutorial on the tiered skirt here on YouTube. So if you're not familiar with Sew Black, you should definitely go check her out. She has a beautifully done tutorial on a tiered skirt. She did hers in purple gingham, and I just followed along with hers. So I have 3 tiers on this skirt. The first tier, the tier closest to my waist, was 30 inches, and I did two 30-inch panels to get a total of 60 inches, and it was 4.5 inches wide. My second tier that I ended up cutting was 2 panels that were both 27.5 inches long and 6 inches wide. And the very bottom tier was 27.5 inches long, and it was 4 of those at 7.5 inches wide. These measurements are very important because I knew I wanted the length of the skirt to be a little bit below the knees because I planned on wearing a poofier petticoat and did not want the skirt to come up above my knees. But because I decided to go with a longer length for this JSK than I normally would have, my God, was I cutting it close as far as being able to have enough fabric to finish making the dress for the top portion where the bust and the straps, and I even had enough fabric left over to make waist ties, because if you've watched any of my videos before on Lolita Sewing, you will know that I am one of those weirdos who enjoys having waist ties on my dress, just for, you know, the ability to customize my sizing as time goes on. So here you can see that I am cutting out the first tier. Do I suggest cutting on carpet? No. But for the amount of cutting I needed to do, I ended up having to cut on the floor. Something else that you will notice here is the direction of the pattern made this way more difficult than it would have been if this were like a gingham or something that didn't have a repeating directional pattern. Because the vases faced a certain way, I could not cut the strips or the tiers lengthwise. I had to cut them all widthwise, which meant cutting more panels out in order to get the total length that I needed. Does that make sense? Like, you see how the seashell and the vases face upward? Yeah. So be mindful of that when choosing a pattern. And here you can see that I am cutting out the Oleander pattern, my modified Oleander pattern from Mood Fabrics, the same pattern I always use for my JSKs. And to start out with the bust, I'm going to add lace down the center detail, and then you're going to make a lining out of the same pattern because we're lining this in order to make sure that we have clean seams and we can top stitch. And you're going to do that by just facing them right sides together. Before I do that though, I am going to make my straps so that I can sew that in between the 2 layers and have a clean top stitch where the strap is completely folded into the top of the garment. This is important for later because you're only going to do this on the front side of the straps where the straps meet in the front. I don't sew it on the back side of the bust panel because I like making my straps adjustable, so I usually just leave the end of those straps out and use my automatic buttonholer to put buttonholes in it so I can adjust it later. Next comes the very tedious part of serging every single edge of every single panel for every single tier. I know that because I'm gathering this, I do not want to run the risk. It is 100% cotton, but I don't want to run the risk of having it fray in places and come apart. And also, I just like having clean seams on the insides of my garments. So it may not be the most professional seam, but I feel like for things that I'm not selling and things that I'm just wearing myself, durability is the goal here. So serging the edges are completely fine to me. And here you can see I have my first tier done, and that was the 230-inch panels. Then I have my second tier done, which is two 27.5-inch long panels. And then the very last tier, 4 27.5-inch panels, almost 90 inches total for that last panel. Now we get into doing some gathering. So I have my stitch length set to the longest stitch length and width, and we're just gonna go in with a straight stitch to make these in order to pull the drawstring. Now, here's something that I would suggest. I would suggest not using a straight stitch. I would suggest using a zigzag stitch because it makes the gathers more even. And here you can see me pulling on the bottom side or the bobbin thread in order to get the panels gathered. I started with gathering the very bottom tier first to match the total width of, or the total length of the second tier. So I started with the bottom and then I gathered going up. And that made it easy for me to get everything into the final length of the tier closest to my waist, which needed to be a little more than 60 inches so that I could gather it down to my waist measurement, which is about 48-49 inches. So here you can see that I'm working on the next tier and getting ready to gather it again, but I ran out of bobbin thread. Is it a sewing video of mine if I don't play chicken with the bobbin? So this is what one side of the panels look like. Now I did this in two parts because I wanted to add pockets. I don't believe that there should be dresses without pockets. If you got a big long fluffy dress, it should have pockets. This was literally all I had left over. So just enough to make waist ties, which you can see I did there. And then also enough for me to make accessories and the back panel. Now, I'm still fooling around with the method on doing elasticated backs. This time I decided that I was going to do the ribbon method, which is just sewing strips of ribbon to the back and then running an elastic through that ribbon like a channel and then sewing the elastic shut so that it doesn't come apart. I'm not quite sure that I like this method. Once it's gathered, you really can't see the stitches once it's like scrunchy, but still. Here's where I realized I ran out of lace. I was so frustrated. So I had to drive to two different Michaels stores to try and find the lace that I had already sewn to the skirt. Thankfully, at the second store, they had one last roll. And with that all settled, I flipped my bodice and my skirt inside out and put right sides together with the bottom of the bodice hitting the top of the skirt, and I sewed that all together. Once those two sides were sewn together, I went on ahead and put my elastic through the ribbon channels, pulled them through using a safety pin, and then sealed them up using the double duty straight stitch on the sewing machine. After that, I sewed my button to the back of the bodice and did my buttonholes, and we were all ready to go. I, of course, accessorized and did a whole cord. I thought pearls were super appropriate for this. And also, it was cold, so I ended up having to wear a coat to the market. But that was fine because I had a cream-colored trench coat that I thought would be really cute with it. Once I actually got to the market, I was just a little bit disappointed that even though it was supposed to be a Studio Ghibli themed market, there wasn't a whole lot of Ghibli themed items going on there. You know me, if you tell me there's a theme, I'm expecting theme. But there was a lot of cool stuff, a lot of vintage, a lot of older jewelry, things that brought me back to my childhood, like these colored bangles here. I did end up picking up some pins that were Ghibli themed from this vendor here, Kitty Knot. I got the classic bacon over calcifer. And I also got to meet a really cool Lolita that is in my local comms. So all in all, I think it was a great day. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!